because you just cannot help yourself. I can't believe this latest Iron Whale event that they just released for Apex Legends, a limited time. They want to actually charge us over $200 for a single item. When you're overpricing your items to this degree, you are insulting your audience.
Something I've always found interesting about reactionary gamer bro YouTubers is how a lot of them will criticize these corporations who make the video games. They will criticize their awful business practices, their predatory business practices, including microtransactions and loot boxes. They'll criticize often as well the working conditions, although not as consistently. And then they'll turn around and either vote for Donald Trump or be a Trump supporter like someone like the Quartering, or someone like the Act Man who says they are a capitalist. What they don't realise is that they're actually critiquing capitalism and the capitalist system. They just don't really realise it, and I think that's down to a lot of factors. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of the problems they have with these systems in video games, these corporations, it's not a one-off, it's not unique to the video game industry, it's a problem with capitalism overall. Now, this is a broad topic to take up, so I am going to use some clips from the Quartering, and the Act Man actually made a video about loot boxes like a couple of weeks ago, so that's helpful. But it's more of a response and talking about how these problems are obviously not in the vacuum of video games. They actually are part of, you know, wider problems within the economic system that most of us have to live in. Now, before we go any further, if you want to support my work, please like the video, maybe subscribe to the channel, and maybe check out my Patreon page in the description. We now have a Discord, so also check that out and come chat with the little community that is growing in there. And also maybe check out the subreddit r/for Kavernacle. So the Quartering probably is the worst example because he's a guy who whines about everything, but he's also an out-and-out Trump supporter on Twitter, talking about all this stuff during the election. So here's just a quick clip of him whining about loot boxes from back in the day.
Hopkins compares the mechanics to surprise toys, which have been around, quote, for years. It's Kinder Eggs or Hatchimals or Lulz Surprise. No, it's not. When you buy a Kinder Egg, no matter what, you get some crummy chocolate and a toy. Also, you don't need to buy Kinder Eggs in order to enjoy a video game or compete with other people. Are you kidding me? I guess they have to talk in a way that tries to convince these governments to not ban loot boxes, as we've seen. We've seen desperation out of companies like 2K, where they're actually emailing customers asking them to talk to their governors or their state representatives to try and tell them, hey, we want these mechanics to stay in. No, we don't. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, as somebody who used to buy sports games every year, I loathe them. I have never spent a dime on any of this garbo, but I would actually rather pay $10 to $15 more for a video game if they spent more of their time on improving the actual game and less on figuring out sneaky ways, algorithmically or otherwise, to get people to buy these loot boxes.
So we're starting to see their problem is that companies like EA, companies like Activision are starting to, you know, put these predatory practices in everything to make as much money as possible, and in their view it's, you know, scummy or unethical. But if you're an out-and-out capitalist, are you really going to begrudge corporations trying to make as much money as possible? So the Act Man is another capitalist, although he's not really brazen about it on Twitter or anything. So I just typed in Act Man capitalism to see what came up. So here's one tweet where he's, I guess, being against socialism. So he says, 9 PM, live an extremely unfulfilled, unsatisfying life, the same as everyone else, because I'm no longer entitled to the fruits of my labour. And also he seems to think that capitalism means you're entitled to the fruits of your labour. So was that a typo? Capitalism means you're entitled to the fruits of your labour. So obviously in our capitalist system, this is the exact opposite. Anyone who has worked any job for someone else can attest to this, because what happens is that you give up most of your time, you work hard to make the boss as much money as possible, and you get paid a measly amount of those profits, and often your mental health suffers, your physical health suffers. You literally give your body away to making someone else an insane amount of profit, and your labour is never valued properly in a capitalist system. Now, I don't know if the Act Man has had a job, I'd assume he has, But I think sometimes when you're a successful YouTuber who makes your money off YouTube, where the job is pretty cushy and you're making a lot of money, you probably forget this is the dynamic for most of the world, where they aren't making a lot of money from making videos on YouTube. They're just making minimum wage, doing hard jobs, doing physical jobs, or even, just standard jobs where they're not valued, and where the people at the top are just making as much money as possible. But let's go into how an ideology like the Atmans and the Quarterings of, I'm a capitalist and I want to have the fruits of my labour and, everything like that. Let's see how it translates into their opinion on loot boxes and microtransactions. So let's go to the Atmans video I was talking about.
Legends say that on a dark, stormy night, a young Australian man set foot within a forgotten cemetery in London. On a faded grave bore the name Karl Marx. The man fell to his knees and shouted towards the sky,
"Is this good for the player?"
It was then that the ghost of Karl Marx arose from his casket and told the young Australian of a plan to destroy capitalism. And so, Andrew Wilson returned to his laboratory, where he plotted and schemed for days, weeks, months, and years, until one day, one fateful evening, he crept into EA headquarters, barged into the shareholders' top-secret meeting, and laid the blueprints for his terrible plan before their very eyes. It was on that fateful day that the loot box was conceived.
Now, I don't really understand that bit about Karl Marx and how he told Andrew Wilson to destroy capitalism by inventing FIFA Ultimate Team and the original loot boxes, but is he trying to say that this is against capitalism? I don't know, because it's obviously not. But maybe in typical Gamer Bro fashion, he's just memeing this stuff. Now, Atman goes on to say about how loot boxes can essentially be justified because of the cost of video games.
The retail price for a standard video game has stayed the same for the last 30 years. Can you think of any other business that hasn't changed the cost of their product in 30 years? So as video games became more ambitious and expensive to produce, publishers, shareholders, and developers needed to find other ways to earn back their investment and turn a profit. Because companies are constantly trying to find the most effective way to monetize their games without directly raising the price.
Games that come out and we pay $60 for, these huge mega Goliath development companies probably need to average $80 to $100 off each copy to be quote-unquote profitable enough. So by putting loot boxes in there, they'll raise the overall average revenue per piece to satisfy their shareholders.
Now, this is something the Quartering also spoke about, how the price of video games has been fairly consistent over the last 25 years, depending on region. If you live in Europe, like I do, you've pretty much been getting screwed on video game prices. All the games on the PlayStation 5 store at the moment about 70 quid. That isn't 60 bucks. So Americans might have a different view of this stuff. Also, I want to just debunk this notion a bit. Most video game companies don't pay their fair share of tax. Activision Blizzard, one of the most successful video games companies, doesn't pay their taxes. Not only that, they actually get tax credits from the US government, and multiple other video game companies actually get tax breaks and tax credits from the UK government. So essentially, the price of video games doesn't really matter to their bottom line because they're not paying their fair share of taxes. So that's the stuff that really offsets, potentially, the increasing budgets of video games. And the way gamers often frame it is suddenly these guys just want to take a bigger risk. No, they're spending more money because they have more money. And of course, like I mentioned, they don't have to pay their fair share. So it's worth the investment for them. So carving up your game and selling it back to the players as DLC or adding in season passes, loot box, microtransactions, that isn't a bid to recover the cost of making that game. That is just a bid to make as much money as possible from your product. And as a capitalist, and as capitalists as most reactionary gamers are, you think they'd agree with that notion. They're just playing on the market. They're playing on the free market. And if you don't like the way they're doing this stuff, if you don't like the microtransactions, if you don't like the loot boxes, then just take your business elsewhere. That's what they would say to most people. And they'd often use the example of Battlefront 2, where gamers said enough and gave EA the most downvoted Reddit comment in history, but that game still sold insanely well. And the key games that actually make the most off loot boxes are the sports games that EA owns. And I'm telling you, from a UK perspective, a lot of people are brainwashed to actually like this stuff and spend so much money on it. And I think there would be a bit of an outcry if they took it away, unless they reformed it somewhat. And in the society we live in the West, where we have a lovely mix of the worst elements of state capitalism and the worst elements of free market capitalism, is that there isn't a competitor to the EA Sports games, because EA signed exclusive deals for the rights for most of the big leagues in this sport. I play Pro Evolution Soccer by Konami instead of FIFA. Most of the teams are not licensed in that game.
The bottom line, objectively speaking, loot boxes are a form of gambling, and they were unregulated. But gambling itself is something that can be fun and rewarding. It's simply impossible to maintain a game's integrity if you monetize randomness and chance.
So as you've seen there, Axeman goes on to say that these loot boxes are essentially gambling in video games. Now, he doesn't actually have a problem with gambling. Gambling can be fun, gambling can be a good distraction for people, but when you put that into your video game, you ruin the integrity of your video game. Now that's two things I want to touch on there. And my main problem with these reactionary gamers is that they seem to ignore the other symptoms of the economic system that we live in. Jim Sterling's a good example of someone who doesn't. But let's talk about gambling for a second. Yeah, gambling is fun in certain contexts if you have a lot of money to blow, if you don't have an addictive personality. But what I'm here to tell you, in an economic system like ours, gambling preys on the lowest in society, the people with the least amount of money, the people who have addictive personalities, the people who are extremely vulnerable. Poorest areas in the UK have the most gambling shops. Why do you think that is? Because gambling offers the promise, the hope of getting out of this system of poverty. Of course, the odds are completely stacked against them, and what normally happens is that because it's so predatory, it just puts these people in insane amounts of debt. But it also touches on the addictive personality side. A lot of people get into gambling because their personalities like the dopamine hit of winning. They might not necessarily be poor or anything, but it can still ruin your life. Even if you're not in one of these poor areas and you go spend a ton on the bookies every weekend when the football's on, you could still be this addictive person, and then you'll get yourself into more debt. And this happens also in FIFA, and also happens with other loot boxes that people buy. They put themselves into a lot of debt, and you have to scale back away from gaming and analyze the societal reasons why this happens. While you can say a lot of it is due to people's personalities, a lot of it is also due to people being very vulnerable and desperate, and you can also link that into a lot of people seek this high because their life might not be so good, and this might be caused by the economic system. Now, I also want to touch on the integrity part, and I don't understand why these people think these video game companies care about integrity of their products. They exist to make as much money as possible, like I said. You can play the market like a CD Projekt Red and say, we are not doing any of that stuff, look how great we are, and then behind the scenes you can just treat your employees really badly, and that's another issue. And while an EA might be more brazen, like these people like it, we're going to keep it in, and if you say it's gambling, then we don't really care, we disagree with that. But I don't understand the criticism coming from a capitalist angle, because you don't care about real gambling, you said it's fun. So suddenly when gambling pops up in video games, it's the worst thing ever. Now, a legit issue is obviously children using this system, but if you agree with gambling as a concept, I'm guessing you wouldn't mind so much if we put an age limit where you could gamble in video games, but you had to be over the age of 18. But I just find it funny how most of the biggest critics, the loudest voices in gaming of loot boxes and microtransactions are these types of people, the reactionary gamers, the capitalist gamers, who never tie their criticism into a wider criticism of the economic system, a wider criticism of how loopholes and laws allow companies like EA to get away with this, and how you can't even justify these insane add-ons in the first place because these companies don't pay tax and we literally fund their games. If you are American, your taxes fund Call of Duty, and then they're going to sell you that product for a very high price these days, like £70 on the PS5. Then they're going to cut a load of content, like the new Black Ops game seems like it's missing a lot of content, and either sell it back to you, like they always have, or they are going to keep you on the hook by promising free updates, but then they'll get you with either loot boxes or straight up microtransactions. Now, like I said, they're benefiting from the worst aspects of state and free market capitalism. They're in bed with the government. Like I said, they're getting tax credits. They're not paying their fair share. So that's a nice symptom of state capitalism for you. But on the free market side, they have eaten up a lot of the market themselves. There isn't really many alternatives for a polished military shooter. There are a couple, but they don't really compare to Call of Duty in size or budget. And just like FIFA, and I'm going to use the UK as the best example, Call of Duty and FIFA have their hooks so deep in the mainstream gaming communities in this country that people will not abandon them no matter what they do. And what they see through their install base is a perfect way to make as much money as possible, as good capitalists will do. Will they make their product worse so they can sell more back to you? Of course they will. Will they introduce gambling into their games? Of course they will. Will they release their games with not enough content? Will they cut features they used to have, like Black Ops 4 didn't have a single player campaign and that game still sold more than the last Call of Duty? They will do that because they have no incentive to do otherwise. They don't care about things like integrity. Money-making machines do not care about integrity, especially things as trivial as, I guess, consumer opinion of a handful of people, while the masses who don't pay attention to gaming news will just eat this stuff up. And just like the capitalist system in general, it's predatory. And you've probably seen that video of that guy talking about how to make mobile games more addictive. It preys on people. It conditions you to want that dopamine hit, so it exploits the most vulnerable. It exploits the people with addictive personalities. It exploits the mentally ill who are just looking for a dopamine hit to make themselves feel better. Because when you win in something like gambling or gaming, it feels good. So I just wish more gamers would be like Jim Sterling and realise their criticisms of loot boxes, microtransactions and all the rest of it aren't just criticisms of bad companies. They are criticisms of the economic system we have in general, and I just find it kind of funny that these people, also the people who normally don't talk about the workplace environments in a lot of these companies, whether it's companies I really like Naughty Dog or CD Projekt Red, and you hear the awful reports from them and the burnout and just the awful working conditions these people have to work in. Now it's funny they close their ears and eyes to the real human suffering that goes into making these products, but as soon as the board members or the CEOs or the businessmen infringe in their opinion by making loot boxes and microtransactions to make more money, that's where they draw the line because it directly inconveniences them. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you want to support my work, please like and share the video, maybe subscribe to the channel. If you want to find me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. Also check out my subreddit r/the Kavernacle. Check out my personal Reddit u/Tommy Cahill 1995. Also check out my Patreon in the description. Come join my Discord. Come look at my TikTok and my Medium pages. That is all in the description. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.